hand went into the wall and pulled out a wooden box. The woman holding it was 8 months pregnant, breathing hard, covered in plaster dust. She had been pulling at a loose board in the back bedroom for 20 minutes. She almost stopped. She almost left it alone. The box was locked. She shook it once. Something shifted inside. Heavy. Not paper. She sat down on the floor right there because she had to. The baby kicked hard. She pressed one hand to her belly and held the box against her knee with the other. Her name was Claire Merritt. Her husband had been dead for 6 weeks. This was his farmhouse. His walls. His box. Outside, a truck slowed at the edge of the property, idled for a long moment, then drove on. What was inside that box changed everything she knew. Stay with me on this one. Her name was Claire Merritt, and she was 28 years old. And for the first time in her adult life, she had no plan. Daniel Merritt had died on a Tuesday in October. A tractor, a steep slope, a moment when the machine moved faster than a man could react. Nobody was there to see it. The neighbor who found him came to the farmhouse door with his hat in his hand and gave her 2 sentences. Then he left. That was the end of Daniel Merritt. They had been married 14 months. Claire had grown up in Cincinnati. She met Daniel at a church fundraiser her 3rd week in Knoxville, where she had moved for a nursing program she later quit. He was 41, quiet, careful with his words. He brought her coffee at that fundraiser without being asked. She thought that said something about who he was. Maybe it did. He married her 8 months after they met. 6 months after that, she was pregnant. 2 months after that, he was dead. She had no money of her own. Her family was back in Cincinnati, and the kind of distance between them was not measured in miles. She had 2 brothers who didn't return calls and a mother who had made her opinions about the marriage known from the start and felt no need to soften them now. When Daniel's lawyer called and told her she had inherited the farmhouse and 42 acres in the foothills of eastern Tennessee, she put a few boxes in her car and drove there alone. Now here's the thing about that farmhouse. Daniel had never taken her there. In 14 months of marriage, he talked about the place plenty. He called it the home place, said it needed work, said he'd been meaning to fix it up for years. She had imagined something needing attention. She had not imagined this. The front porch was missing 2 boards. The side bedroom window was covered in plywood. There was a water stain on the kitchen ceiling the size of a dining room table. The wood stove worked. The well pump worked barely. Every room carried the smell of the previous century. She stood in the front doorway that first afternoon with both hands on her belly and looked at it and thought, I have nowhere else to go. So she stayed. She had 3 weeks until her due date. She wasn't going to do anything dramatic. She was just going to get the place livable enough to bring a baby into. Patching, cleaning, hauling out the old boxes of junk somebody had left in every corner. She started in the kitchen and worked room by room. The neighbors were polite but careful. 2 families brought food the first few days, a casserole, a pie. They asked how she was getting on. They did not ask about Daniel. A woman named Mrs. Bowman from across the road smiled when Claire mentioned his name, but the smile sat wrong on her face, a little too fixed, a little too held in place. The man at the feed store in town looked at the floor when she said the Merritt name. Nobody said anything bad. Nobody said much at all. Daniel's mother, Edna, was 73. Sharp eyes, slow movements. She came by on Claire's 4th day and walked through the house like she had a right to, touching the door frames with one hand. When Claire asked if she needed anything, Edna said, "The land's good. Just that. Nothing else." She left before dark. And then there was Wade Combs. Wade owned the 400 acres that bordered Daniel's property on 3 sides. He came by the 2nd day Claire was there. Big man, short gray hair, a good truck. He shook her hand and said he was sorry for her loss. Then he told her that if she ever wanted to sell, he would give her a fair price. Better than fair. Whatever she needed. She told him she hadn't thought about it. He said, "Take your time." He came back 4 days later. Then again 3 days after that. Then twice the following week. By the time Claire started pulling at the walls in the back bedroom, looking for the source of a draft, checking the insulation, Wade Combs had been out to the property 5 times in 2 weeks. 5 times. For a man who barely knew her, she had started to wonder what exactly he was after. Then her hand went into the wall and found the box. She tried the latch first. Old brass, corroded solid. She turned the box over, proper lock, small keyhole on the front face. She looked around the room. She went to Daniel's bureau. The one she hadn't opened since she arrived. The one she'd been walking past like it might bite her. She pulled out the top drawer. A watch, cufflinks, a utility bill from 2019. And in the corner, hung on a small hook, a brass key the size of her thumbnail. She fit it into the lock. Turned. Inside, a bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine, maybe 20 of them. A folded document that felt like legal paper. 3 photographs. And on top, a sealed envelope with writing on the front in Daniel's careful, slanted hand. To my wife when the time comes. She set that one aside. She picked up the photographs. The first showed a girl, 4 or 5 years old, standing in front of a different farmhouse than this one. Red coat, dark hair, squinting against the sun. Claire did not recognize the child. She did not recognize the farmhouse. The second showed Daniel. Younger, maybe 30. He was sitting at a kitchen table across from a woman Claire had never seen. Tired-looking, young, with a baby on her lap. Daniel had his elbows on the table. He was leaning forward like he was listening hard. The third was just the baby, wrapped in a yellow blanket. Someone had written on the back in pencil. May. August 1st, 2007. Claire set the photographs down and untied the letters. They were addressed to May. Not to the woman. To the child. The earliest was dated 2010 and the most recent was dated 8 months before Daniel died. They were short. Most of them a single page, some less, and they were all written in his hand, the same slant, the same care. They all began the same way. I hope this finds you well. I am thinking of you. He wrote about the farm. About what had grown that year and what hadn't. About the seasons and the weather. He wrote about hoping she was in school, hoping she was eating well, hoping whoever was looking after her was doing right by her. He wrote that he thought about her every day. He wrote that he was sorry he couldn't do more. He never signed his name at the bottom. Every letter closed the same way. Your father. Claire read every one of them. All the way through, front to back, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and the afternoon light moving slow across the bedroom. She did not rush. She did not skip. When she finished the last one, she held it for a long time. Here was what she knew. Daniel had a daughter. Born in 2007, 3 years before Claire ever came to Tennessee. Whatever had happened between him and that woman, whoever she was, it had happened long before Claire. The girl would be 16 now. She sat with that. It was a different kind of quiet than she'd had since he died. Not the empty quiet of a man being absent. Something fuller, like a room that looks bare but isn't. She looked at the sealed envelope. To my wife when the time comes. She put it back in the box. She was not ready. Not yet. She needed to eat. She needed to sleep. She could think about it when she'd slept. She folded the legal document. She hadn't read it closely, and placed it back with the letters. She set the photographs face down on top. She closed the box and set it on the nightstand. Then she went to the kitchen. She heated soup from a can. She ate it standing at the counter and washed the bowl. She looked out the window at the yard, at the tree line, at the November light going gray over the ridge. A daughter. He had a daughter, and he'd been writing to her for 14 years. She went to bed before dark. She lay on her side and felt the baby move and pressed one hand to her belly and closed her eyes. She told herself, people have passed. People carry things they don't know how to say out loud. 14 months was not very long to know someone. She had understood that going in. By the time she fell asleep, she had almost made peace with it. She thought the hard part was behind her. She was wrong about that. She woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of the back door. Not wind. Not the house settling. A latch. The specific sound of a metal latch being pressed slowly from the outside by someone who knew the door. She sat up. The baby pressed against her ribs. The box was on the nightstand. She had no weapon. She was 8 months pregnant and alone. And someone was in her kitchen. She got up anyway. There was nothing else to do. She opened the bedroom door, and Edna Merritt was standing at the kitchen table with her coat still on, both hands flat on the wood like she was bracing herself. The back door was open behind her. Cold air came in off the mountain in a steady push. "You found it," Edna said. She wasn't looking at Claire. She was looking at the closed bedroom door as if she could see the nightstand through it. "I figured you would. You're the kind that pulls at loose boards." Claire said, "Who is May?" Edna's jaw went tight. She pulled out a chair and sat down without being asked. She folded her coat across her lap like she was settling in for something difficult. "May Combs," she said. "She lives with Harlan Combs up on Route 9. Has since she was 2 years old." The name landed hard. "Combs," Claire said. "Wade's cousin. Different branch of the family. Wade's got nothing to do with raising that child. Never did. But he knows she exists. And he knows what Daniel put in that box. Believe me when I tell you." She felt the room change. Not because of May. She had already started to accept May. It was what came next. "What did Daniel put in that box?" she said. Edna looked up at her. First time she'd really looked at her since she'd walked in. "The deed," she said. "The real one. The one that shows the mineral rights stayed with the land. Wade has been after those rights for 20 years. Daniel wouldn't sell. Wouldn't even talk about it. When Daniel died, Wade thought the deed had never been put in writing proper. That the estate would be unclear and it would all eventually fall the way he wanted." She paused. "That's why he keeps coming around. He's not making conversation." Claire stood in the doorway of her dead husband's house at 3 in the morning and let that settle. Wade hadn't been coming around because he felt sorry for her. He had been coming around to figure out what she had. "And May," Claire said. "What does she have to do with the deed?" "Nothing directly," Edna said. "But Daniel loved that child. Sent money every year. Wrote to her. Harlan's been keeping the letters from her. Wade asked him to. He was afraid if May found out who her father was, she'd start asking questions about the property. This is where it turns. All of it. She wasn't just untangling a secret. She was standing in the middle of something that had been in motion for 20 years before she arrived. Daniel had known. He had tried to protect what mattered the only way he could, by hiding things in walls and writing letters to a girl who never received them. "He wrote to her for 14 years. Claire said. "She never got them?" Edna shook her head once. Flat. Final. Something hardened in Claire's chest. She looked at the box through the closed bedroom door. "I'm going to read the letter," she said. "The one he left for me." "I know," Edna said. She made no move to leave. Claire went to the bedroom. She picked up the sealed envelope. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. 3 pages, folded together. She read all of them through twice in the middle of the night, slowly, with the cold pressing against the old glass in the window. If you're still here, if you've come this far, hit that subscribe button. What Daniel wrote in that letter is what changes everything that comes after. He told her about May's mother, a woman named Lori. He had been with Lori years before. Long before Claire, before he moved away, before he knew she was pregnant. Lori had died in 2010, 2 years after May was born. Her family placed May with Harlan. Daniel found out late. Too late, he believed, to claim her without tearing apart the only stable home she'd ever known. So he watched from a distance, sent money every year, wrote letters he couldn't be sure were ever delivered. He had also seen a lawyer. 6 months before he died. The deed was in order. The mineral rights were recorded, clearly tied to the farmhouse, clearly Claire's. And he had left her one instruction, written out plain in his careful hand. Find May. Tell her the truth. Give her the letters. He had trusted Claire to do what he hadn't been able to. She folded the pages and put them back in the box with the others. Then she walked to the kitchen and looked at Edna, who was still at the table with her coat in her lap. Where exactly on Route 9? She said. She drove out the next morning. Edna had gone home before sunrise. Claire waited for daylight, made coffee, stood at the window for a long time. Then she got in the car. Route 9 was 12 miles north, up into the hills, past a grain elevator and a church with a missing letter on its sign. The Harlan Combs place was a double-wide on a gravel pad with a barn that had seen better decades, with stacked against the side of the house, and a dog that lifted its head as she pulled in. She sat in the car for a moment. The door opened before she reached it. A girl came out onto the small porch. 16, maybe, dark hair, long-limbed, wearing a heavy flannel over a gray shirt, arms crossed against the cold. She looked at Claire the way people look when they already know who's coming before the knock falls. She was the girl in the photograph. Older, clearly, but the same dark hair, the same set to her jaw. Claire got out of the car, 8 months pregnant in her dead husband's old work coat because nothing else fit. She walked to the porch and stopped at the bottom of the steps. The girl said, "You're Daniel's wife." Not a question. "Yes," Claire said. "I'm Claire." May looked at her for a moment. Then she looked past her at the road, checking to see if anyone else had come along. "Harlan's in town," she said. "You can come in." Inside, the house was small but clean. A wood stove in the corner. A kitchen table with 2 chairs. School books stacked on the counter. May put a kettle on without asking and stood with her back to it, arms still crossed, watching Claire with careful eyes. "How did you find me?" she said. "Edna told me." "Edna." She said the name without expression. Just receiving the information. Figured she'd come into it eventually. "Did you know about me?" Claire said. "That Daniel had gotten married?" May nodded. "He wrote and said so. Last winter." A pause. "I got some of his letters. Not all of them. I worked out a while back that Harlan had been holding them. I found a stack in his truck about a year ago. He doesn't know I found them. There it was. She had gotten some letters. She knew her father's handwriting. She had known about Claire for close to a year and said nothing. She had waited. "I'm sorry," Claire said, "for what was kept from you. All of it." May looked at the kettle. She was not going to cry. Claire could see that plainly. This was a girl who had been managing herself for a long time. "He's gone," May said. "I found out 2 months ago. Harlan didn't tell me. I saw it in the paper." Claire sat down at the table. The baby shifted, a long rolling movement, and she pressed a hand to her side. "He left you something," she said. "The letters, the ones that didn't get through, that he kept himself. All of them. And he wrote you a letter of his own. I want you to have all of it." May turned around. She looked at Claire's belly. "When are you due?" 3 weeks, Claire said. "Give or take." "You staying out at the farm?" "I am." May poured the water into 2 cups and brought them to the table. She sat across from Claire and wrapped both hands around her cup and looked at it. "Wade came by last week," she said. "Told Harlan that Daniel's wife was going to sell before spring. That it would all be settled and there was no point in anyone making trouble." She looked up. "He said it like it was already decided." "He was wrong," Claire said. May held her eyes for a moment. "I have a letter from Daniel," Claire said. "He wrote it for me. He asked me to find you, give you the letters and tell you the truth. And to tell you he was sorry. And that he thought about you every single day." The girl's jaw moved. Just once. Claire took a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket and set it on the table. She had written down what mattered most before she left. Not the whole letter, that was private, but the things May needed to hear. The important parts, in Daniel's words, where she could manage it. May picked it up. She read it. She read it again. Then she set it down and looked at the wood stove. "He couldn't come," she said. "That's what he's telling me. That's what he's saying. I know he couldn't." Pause. "Doesn't make it not hurt." "No," Claire said. "It doesn't." They sat like that for a while. The stove popped. Outside, the dog barked once at something in the field and then went quiet. Finally May said, "What happens to the land?" "It stays mine," Claire said. "The deed is clear. I've already called the lawyer." May nodded slowly. "Wade's going to be unhappy about that." "I imagine he will," Claire said. "But that's Wade's problem." Something shifted in May's face. Not quite a smile. Something underneath a smile. A small unlocking. "He's been telling people for years that land was going to fall to him eventually," she said. "Harlan used to talk about it like it was already done." "Well," Claire said, "it's not." She drove back to the farmhouse alone, the way she had come. The hills were gray and flat in the November light. She stopped at the top of a rise and looked out over the valley for a moment before starting down. She didn't know exactly what she was doing. She knew some things. The land was hers, the deed was recorded, the lawyer was making calls. Wade Combs would have to live with that. That part was settled. The other part was harder to name. She had a stepdaughter, 16 years old, living 12 miles away with a man who had been keeping her from her father's letters. A girl who had read what she could get her hands on in secret, who had quietly worked out that her father had remarried, who had found out he was dead through a newspaper, who had never once pushed through any door and demanded something she was owed. Claire had grown up with that particular kind of alone. Not orphaned alone. Not without food alone. The kind where the people around you are present but not quite there. She recognized it in May the same way you recognize a song from years ago. Not all at once, but with a slow, settling certainty. She pulled back onto the road and drove home. Wade came by that afternoon. He knocked for the first time, instead of just pulling up to the door. She opened it and looked at him. He said he'd heard she found something in the house. In the walls. She said she didn't know what he was talking about. He looked at her a long time. He was a big man, used to being believed when he spoke. She could see him deciding how far to push it. He didn't push. He nodded once, wished her a good evening, and walked back to his truck. He drove out slow, the way he always did, like the lane was his. She called the lawyer from the kitchen, told him about the visit. He said he'd document it. He said the mineral rights were recorded clean and there was nothing Wade could do about it legally. He also said that didn't mean Wade was finished making things uncomfortable. She said she would manage. She hung up and looked around the kitchen. The stain on the ceiling. The wood stove she'd been feeding every morning before coffee. The window she'd reglazed herself with a kit from the hardware store. The box on the nightstand that she couldn't quite bring herself to move. Daniel had built this place into something once. Then he let it go. Then he died before he could fix it. She was not going to let it go. For days later, May showed up at the door. Just appeared. A truck dropped her at the end of the lane and she walked up. She was carrying a backpack and she offered no explanation. Claire let her in. Made her something to eat. Didn't ask a lot of questions. May slept in the back bedroom. The one with the patched wall. In the morning she asked if she could help fix the porch boards. Claire said yes. That was how it started. It was not easy. Nothing about it was easy. May was 16 with her own grief and her own way of doing things that didn't always line up with Claire's. They argued about small things. They ate in silence sometimes. There were mornings when Claire lay in bed and thought, I am 28 years old and 8 months pregnant, and I am living in a broken house with a teenager I met 3 days ago, and I have no idea what I am doing. But she got up every one of those mornings. So did May. The baby came on a cold Tuesday in December, 17 days early. Claire woke at 2 in the morning and she knew. She got up and went to May's door and knocked and said, "It's time." May drove her to the hospital. She was 16 with a learner's permit, and she drove those 12 miles with both hands on the wheel, never once going over the speed limit, which is the most frightening thing you can witness from the passenger seat when a baby is on the way. But they made it. They made it fine. The baby was a girl. Claire named her Ruth, which was Edna's middle name. Edna came to the hospital and held Ruth for 20 minutes without speaking, and when she handed her back her eyes were wet. May stood in the doorway of the hospital room and looked at the baby for a long time without saying anything. Then she said, "She's pretty small." Claire said, "She'll get bigger." May said, "I know. They do." By February, the farmhouse had real heat. From a furnace a man in town had installed in exchange for Claire doing his small business bookkeeping, a trade they'd worked out over 2 weeks of conversation. The porch was solid. The bedroom window had real glass. The kitchen ceiling was drywalled over clean. On the first warm day of March, a day that felt like a door opening somewhere far off, Claire carried Ruth out to the garden patch on the south side of the house. Still cold enough for a coat. She'd borrowed a trowel from the shed. She was going to put in one seedling. Just one. Just to begin. May came out behind her without being asked. She crouched down next to Claire and held Ruth while Claire worked the trowel into the ground. The earth there was dark and rich, turned easily. Daniel had known that. He had known what the land was worth all along. Not the way Wade Combs thought about it. Not in mineral rights or dollars or what you could pull out of the ground and haul away. The other way. The way that stays. Claire pressed the seedling in and covered the roots and stood up. It was a start.